All right, welcome everyone to day 2 of the 33rd Annual Friesen Lecture Series. I'm Andrew Wister, the Director of Gerontology Research Center, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Bombush. She's a professor at the University of BC in the School of Nursing and a former CIHR Chair in Sex and Gender Science. She leads a research program examining health inequality and equity in the context of climate change, with a focus on older adults, people with lifelong disabilities, and family caregivers. You can find out more about her on her link in the program, but I just want to say one more thing, is that Jennifer was a student of mine at one point, I think in the diploma program, right? Yeah, and wow, she's really flourished. So we're very proud of you, Jennifer.
You so Thanks, Andrew. I won't age either of us by saying when I was here, but the gerontology program at SFU is among the best internationally, and if you have an opportunity to learn from these individuals, it's just an amazing life experience. So thank you, and thank you for guiding me on this path. It's part of the reason why I'm here. So thank you everybody for being here this morning. My team and I are going to talk a little bit today about some of our projects where we're looking at fostering resilience in an era of climate change. So back in April 2021, if you had asked me, what do you think about climate change in older adults, Jennifer, I would have said I don't think very much about it. In fact, I don't think about it at all. So I've been a nurse for 30 years working with older adults, and I always have felt that climate change is about public health nursing, other people's nursing, not my nursing. And so back in April 2021, I was thinking about COVID. So as you'll recall, everybody in this room I'm sure remembers that in 2021 we were in some of our COVID public health measures. I had started doing research about people living with dementia in community and their caregivers, and the plan was to look at that topic. And then in March 2020, of course, COVID hit, and that transformed my research program. And all of a sudden I, along with everybody else who does research around aging, was looking at our research in the context of COVID. So that's where I was in 2021, and this is one of the papers that came out of that project. If you came back and asked me in the summer of 2021, what do you think about climate change in older adults, Jennifer? I would have said, this is almost all I think about. What happened in the summer of 2021, and I'm sure you all again remember, is that at the end of June and beginning of July, we had Vancouver's first heat dome, and we all felt really, really hot. And over 600 people died. Many of them were older adults. One of them was a participant in that study I just showed you. And I got a call from someone who used to work with me as a postdoc saying, Jennifer, this has happened to one of our participants. And that sort of opened up for me a whole new way of thinking about what is happening in climate, what is happening in climate change in older adults. And what I very quickly learned and have continued learning about for the last 5 years is that there's a lot to think about when it comes to climate change in older adults. So I'm just so thrilled that this conference is focusing on this over these couple of days. So as you'll recall, during that summer, we had the heat dome, and we were just recovering from that. Then there were a series of terrible wildfires in the interior. I live here in Burnaby. So for me, the experience of those wildfires was air quality. And for a lot of people, it was around air quality. So all of a sudden, everybody was changing their air purifiers they were using for COVID to use it for wildfire smoke. And for people, of course, in the interior, the wildfires were causing mass evacuations of really large care homes, which is an area that I work in as well. And these evacuations aren't for a day, because you have a toaster that lit on fire. These evacuations went on sometimes for weeks and months, and entire care homes moved from the interior to the lower mainland, and the staff came with them, and they lived like that for quite a while. And then, of course, came the atmospheric river in the fall, and again I got phone calls from people saying, Jennifer, I have to go for dialysis. Where do I go? The roads are all flooded. Now please Please know I'm not an active practicing nurse. I'm sitting at UBC doing research. I don't know how you get your dialysis, but it really pointed to a lot of issues that our healthcare system wasn't prepared for. And while we had made advances in virtual care due to COVID, we hadn't done a lot of thinking about what if people just can't get here? Or what if the highway washes out and people can't get supplies from the lower mainland to different parts of the interior, which was happening for families of disabled kids that I also do research with. So all of a sudden, my world became all about climate change. So today we're going to talk about 3 ongoing studies that we're doing, and I'll just briefly introduce them, and then I'm going to hand it off to members of my team to do the more in-depth presentations. So the first presentation that's going to be done by Dr. Jad Brake is experiences of heat wave events among immigrant older adults in Metro Vancouver. This is a study that we're doing with colleagues from McGill, and we're doing a comparison of policies and procedures around extreme heat related to older adults in Vancouver and Montreal. And so Jad has picked up this particular thread of the research around the impact on immigrants, and he'll be talking about that. Next, Dr. Lena Richardson will talk about the impact of climate change on older adults' mental health, a photo voice study. This is a research project we've been doing for the last year, and in the research literature that exists around things like eco-anxiety and impacts on mental health, it largely excludes older adults. And so when I wrote this research grant, it was with the explicit intention to learn about what do the mental health impacts look like for older adults. And this is very much a participatory study where people submitted photos, and Lena will be showing some of that. And then the final study is going to be presented by Christine Meng, who's a doctoral candidate at the School of Nursing at UBC. And this is around fostering environmental sustainability in BC's long-term care home sector. So our team recently completed a survey of where we offered the opportunity to all the care homes in BC to participate, and many of them did, where we learned about what are they doing around environmental sustainability and stewardship. And Christine is going to talk about that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jad and invite him to come up and present on the extreme heat study. And I'll also just add, we welcome your questions, but we're going to go through all our presentations, and so if you can hold them for the end, that would be amazing. Over to you.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to present our paper, which is still in progress, and looks at immigrant older adults' experiences of heat waves. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Thank you. And this paper is a collaboration with colleagues from McGill University, Professor Jordan, Professor Hunt, Bianca Ajay, and Professor Benge from UBC, and the study is funded by CIHR. So since you heard some background on climate change and aging, I would just say that older adults are more affected by heat compared to other populations, and immigrant older adults are even more affected, and this is because of factors related to immigrants, and I will be focusing on these factors. I will also provide some examples of the physical and mental and social impacts or consequences of heat on older adults. So despite the increased literature on climate change and heat and its effect on adults' health, still we have limited studies on the lived experiences of older adults. And we have less studies that looked at the immigrant older adults' lived experiences of heat. And I think BC is a special area to do this research because of the multicultural and diverse nature of this area in terms of ethnicity and language and religion. And also in the recent years, we have increase in immigrant and aging populations, and also increase in heat events, which makes this area very unique to conduct this study. So our goal is to understand how immigrant older adults experience heat events and how they affect them and their life. And we also want to understand how immigrant older adults react and cope with heat events and the challenges that they face that reduce their adaptive capacities. And we also aim to translate our findings into practical guidelines that can inform policy and services, and not only research. So this qualitative study included immigrant older adults and professionals or staff who work with older adults. We conducted one in-person focus group with 10 older adults and 6 interviews with professionals. And we used qualitative thematic analysis to analyze the data and to identify patterns and themes in the data. And these were the 3 main themes emerged from the data, and I will explain each separately and provide examples. So first of all, to understand the experience of heat among immigrant older adults, we need to look at the intersection of aging and immigration. And the data shows that some of the reasons or the factors that increase vulnerability among older adults related to physical and health limitations and mobility and social issues. And in addition to those, there are some factors unique to immigrants. For example, poor living conditions and lack or very limited family and social support, and very important cultural and language-based factors that increase their vulnerability, and I'll provide examples in the next slide. The data also shows some of the examples that participants mentioned, the examples of physical impacts on their health, for example, increased illnesses and injuries. They also shared negative emotions such as fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and also social impacts, for example, limited social engagement and limited outdoor time, all which increased their social isolation. And one of the interesting things that we found in the data that when participants narrated their stories, they always compared their current experiences as older adults with experiences from the past when they were young, and also compared their current experiences in BC with experiences from their previous home countries. And it appears that these comparisons construct or shape their current perceptions and reactions to heat, and I think this is a key for understanding immigrant older adults' experiences. The second theme related to how immigrant older adults react and cope with heat events, and many participants focused on the issue of preparing in advance, for example, buying AC and fans and medication and food. And also many emphasized the issue of community engagement as a kind of adaptive strategy that helped them develop effective adaptive strategies. And also a very important thing is that the unique challenges that immigrant older adults face. Some of them are related to older adults in general, but some of them are very unique to immigrants. For example, language difficulties that limit their access to information and services. Also, many of them spoke about lack of family and social support, and also many of the participants speak about the lack of governmental services or support or ineffective governmental services. And one of the common examples that they shared that, for example, BC gives free AC for older adults, but when they come home, they cannot install the AC because the house is too old, or they are not allowed to install AC in the building where they live. The last theme reflects the importance of community engagement and social networking. So this is particularly important for older adults because through community engagement, first of all, they create connections with others, and because many of them live alone or they don't have social networks, so they create these social networks, and this helps them reduce social isolation, and also interacting with others and exchanging knowledge and experiences, and this helps them obtain relevant information about the climate, because many of them are not very familiar with the local services. Many of the participants also expressed very strong commitment to their communities and to next generations and desire to act and make change. And the second thing is the data demonstrates the very important role of the nonprofit organizations, specifically seniors, community centers, and the help they provide for older adults before and during heat waves. And in fact, they became kind of sometimes the only or the main address that older adults seek when they need support, and they kind of fill a gap in governmental services. So I will end with three main insights or key considerations based on the data. The first thing is to understand immigrant older adults' experiences of heat wave. We have to look at the intersection and to adapt intersectional and holistic approach that looks at the intersection of multiple factors, physiological, cultural, social, environmental factors, and how they interact and shape the experience and reaction of older adults to heat, with specific focus on intersection of aging and immigration. In other words, immigrant older adults' experiences cannot be fully understood if not placed within the context of the overall experience of being immigrant older adult in BC. The second thing is the importance of developing inclusive and culturally informed services and policies that pay attention to special needs of immigrants, and at the same time to be aware that every person is different and they have their own and special needs, so kind of person-oriented approach is also needed. And lastly, it's true that immigrant older adults and older adults in general are very vulnerable to climate change and heat, but at the same time they have power, and this is demonstrated by rich knowledge and experience dealing with heat, and also a very intense desire to help, to contribute to their community. So we have to be aware of this and not only listen to their stories and experiences, but also to include them as partners when thinking about and developing policies and plans. Thank you so much, and I will hand to Dina.
Thanks, Jen. And then you just push the green button. Yeah.
Okay, just gonna pull this down. Hi, everybody. Good to be here. So I'm going to present on the impact of climate change on older adults and our photo voice study on older adults' mental health. And this has been also funded by CIHR, and it's a study in progress, so we are still in the process of data analysis, and I'm going to be giving you a glimpse into where we are now, including some of the photos. So to acknowledge that this is our team, led by Jennifer, and our co-applicant principal knowledge user is Monique Benito from the Canadian Coalition for Seniors Mental Health. We also have Davina Banner from UNBC and a number of other organizations and community members who are part of the research team. So as Jennifer mentioned, the literature on the impact and the study of lived experience of older adults' mental health in the context of climate change, and specifically around eco-anxiety, is fairly limited. It's been mostly focused on youth. There are research studies across multiple countries that show adverse impacts in different ways on the general population around mental health due to climate change and extreme weather events. And there is some existing literature. We see definitely some evidence, older adults being more vulnerable physiologically to the impact of climate change, and also mental health impacts like anxiety, PTSD in certain studies. And some other studies that have been done looking at place-based distress among Indigenous elders, and also some more recent research that points to unique capacities older adults have for prospective resilience and as agents of change around climate issues. So our study intended to, and still intends, to go deeper and look at the lived experience of the direct and indirect impacts of climate change on older adults' mental health, and to identify strategies that older adults use to adapt, mitigate, cope, and take positive action, and using a photo voice process. So just to clarify that we're looking at both indirect impacts and direct impacts. So that's direct is I was in a heat wave and this was the impact for me, or I experienced a fire or smoke directly. And then there's the indirect impacts that's more as a witness at various levels of witnessing, which could be right around you or it could be on the news. And so we're looking at both of those things. So many of you may have heard of Photo Voice. It's a participatory action research process that grows out of Wang and Burritt were the initial founders of this. A method comes from Freirean philosophy, feminist methodologies, and documentary photography. And it's really creating space for participants to reflect and record their experience in another way besides words that may encourage a deeper engagement and ability to share. They can promote critical dialogue, people coming together to reflect on the photos together, and also engage with a broader group of knowledge users like decision makers in the field, policy makers, when we are able to share the photos with others and share the research, as we're going to do a little bit today with what people shared in photos. So we're in process. We've done all of the data collection except this last step, which is a workshop. But last year, we started with recruitment in August, and we did interviews which explored, before people had done any work with photos, we interviewed them about the impact of climate change on their mental health and introduced the photo voice process. And then people submitted up to 6 or sometimes 7 photos reflecting their experience about this topic over 1 to 2 months. And then we did another interview where we really explored the meaning of the photos to them and followed up further about further thoughts they had about this, as well as the process. And then a subsection of those people engaged in focus groups. And eventually, we're going to have a virtual workshop with additional knowledge users, with others in the field, decision makers, policymakers, about this project and sharing, as having some of the older adults also join if they wish. And I just want to share that Personally, this has been such a meaningful project to work on. I've really enjoyed getting to have these conversations, and it's been very powerful to be in a deeper reflective process over time with participants. So we've had 17 participants complete first interviews, and 15 did the whole process of first interviews, photo submissions, and second interviews. And then we had 2 focus groups, and 69 photos were submitted in all, with all the participants. And we're hoping the workshop will be this summer, possibly in June. So just going to give you one glimpse of our demographics. We have a bunch, but in the interest of time, the geographic distribution of participants, more from the lower mainland, but we did have some from northern BC, one from Okanagan, and some from Vancouver Island. And so now I want to share a few examples of what has come through. And just to give a little preface about what this is, we had both asked people to submit photos, but also a reflection sheet about why this photo, and then in the interviews we asked them more about it as well. So this is an example. This is called Fewer Songbirds, and this is a participant who is talking about the impact of just noticing that there's fewer songbirds around her in her local life and community, and the anxiety about what that means about changes that are going on around biodiversity. So we would understand this as more of an indirect impact in that it is in her world, but it's not a direct extreme weather event, but it's something she's noticing that then plants the seeds of other kinds of eco-anxiety. And this speaks to one aspect of what we found through the photos. This is another photo called Any Port in a Storm, and this is an example of a more direct impact. This is someone who went through a wildfire and her cabin burned down. And I find her quote very powerful on this. If you can see in the photo, there's this little duck everything sort of burned out, but under the table there's this little blue duck. And she says, "This sweet ceramic duck survived the intensity of the fire, but it is deceptive. When I picked it up, it came apart in my hands, sort of like me. I too survived the blaze, but the memories haven't lost their power and remain with me." And this participant shared many other aspects of what the ongoing process of dealing with that fire meant and sort of her reflections on climate change in that process. Another theme that is emerging in the work as we do analyze the data is this one about intergenerational impacts, and specifically children and grandchildren. And this participant spoke to how becoming a grandparent, particularly with her the most recent grandchild, brought up anxiety and sadness for her because she's worried about the child's future. And she says, will they grow to be adults? Will they become climate refugees? Will they get cancers at a young age because of the pollutants in the air, water, and soil? So this is also something that other participants mentioned in our focus group and in some of the interviews. And then this photo is called Government Lobby for Leadership, and it is, this participant is speaking to her distress and frustration at the backpedaling around climate policy and action, and how that contributes to her anxiety and depression around mental health. She specifically spoke to the issues around wanting more political action and attempting to engage in it. And on the flip side, I would say that there was a subsection of participants so far as we look at the data and in the focus groups who are finding coping and action through political engagement as one of the most hopeful things they can do. But the concern that it's not making enough of a difference and the powerlessness around that is definitely coming up in some of the interviews. So we're still in process of looking at the data, and some of the key questions we're looking at are how do participants define mental health and climate change in the context of these interviews? And how do their perspectives change over time, evolve over time in this reflective process using photo voice? And how do participants cope and take positive action in relation to the mental health impacts of climate change? So eventually we'll have more to share with you about all this, but thank you. Should I just...
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Christine. I'm a practicing RN and a PhD candidate from School of Nursing at UBC, working with Dr. Jennifer Bambush. And we are very happy to share with you on this project led by Jennifer, looking at the environmental sustainability in BC's long-term care home sectors. We'd like to acknowledge all the co-applicants and collaborators on this project. So they are from different care sectors in long-term care, including clinical practice, leadership and policy, and also from Family and Resident Care Council. Also, this project is funded by the Michael Smith Health Research BC. So why looking at this topic? As Jennifer had mentioned, and also from yesterday's presentation, BC has experienced quite a few extreme climate events for the past few years. One example here is the heat wave in 2021, which really had impact on the people living in the community, especially for the residents living in the long-term care who already have pre-existing health conditions. Also thinking about staff who are providing personal care with 30 or 40 Celsius degree inside with the extreme heat event. And also talking about water and heavy precipitation with high winds damages, a recent flood risk assessment really looking at the lower mainland flood strategies highlighted there could be 13 exposed facilities during a major coastal flood and 18 facilities during a major Fraser River flood. And also in addition with heavy precipitation and high winds could cause water penetration damages to the long-term care home facilities. And these damages are included but not limited to the power outages, the moisture accumulation inside the buildings, roof damages, also with falling trees could lead to the blockage of access to and from the long-term care home, especially for those living, in the rural area or communities. Also, when we think about evacuation, especially related to the wildfire, evacuation is not outside the building or facility anymore. This evacuation takes days, months, or take days, weeks, or months. And these residents, they are leaving all of their communities, their cities, or even province, and really think about how that has a negative impact on both their mental and physical health. And also, we're not just evacuating out of the city or community, we're also getting evacuee from other cities and provinces. So thinking about how do we manage their clinical needs or health needs with already pretty demanding day-to-day operation needs in our own long-term care facilities. So the purpose of our study is to assess the climate readiness of long-term care home in BC, Canada. We conduct a survey really focusing on 2 areas, but for today's presentation, we're only sharing findings related to the environmental sustainability and stewardship. So to briefly introduce the study method, in BC, we have about 300 sites classified as long-term care home. So they're mostly for frail older adults who receive 24/7 nursing care. So they're not the independent care living or assisted care living. They're traditionally be considered nursing home or long-term cares. But for our study, we focus on the affiliate and contracted sites. So they take up around 180 out of 300 sites. And there's about 30,000 people living in this subsidized long-term care home and around 50,000 people working in this long-term care home sites. So for our survey, all the people we mentioned in the acknowledge page contributed to the survey. We designed the initial survey and we went through several rounds of feedback and practice to make sure it was ready to be launched. And we launched on UBC CrowdStrike between September and December 2025, so all the data were kept at UBC. For our survey, we had 3 main components, including site characteristic, emergency management, and environmental sustainability and stewardship. So for our survey, like I mentioned before, we focus on the affiliated and contracted sites. So out of 180 sites, 84 complete the survey. So we had a response rate of 45%. And we make sure there was 1 survey per site. So we had 84 sites participating to the survey. And to share the results, we'll start with the site characteristic. So the average size of this long-term care home are around 122 residents. They're ranging from 34 to 92 residents. And we asked if they are co-located with other services, meaning there could be more than 1 service on their location. Sometimes there could be campus of care with independent living or assisted care living. 42% saying yes, 58% saying no. We asked if they're part of a larger organization. Sometimes it could be chains for both profit or non-for-profit. 76% saying yes, 24% saying no. In terms of long-term care home ownership, for affiliated and contracted sites, they can be owned by nonprofit organizations or society or for-profit private business. So for our studies, 33% are from nonprofit, 64% are for profit, 1% prefer not to say, and 2% I don't know. And all the sites were receive full or partial funding through their local health organizations, health authorities. And in terms of health authority, there are 5 different health authorities, 30% from Friesen Health, 29% from Interior Health, 19% from Island Health, 1% from Northern Health, and 21% from Vancouver Coastal. In terms of their size of the community where long-term care home is located, most of the participants were located in large urban areas, so they are the one over 100,000 population. They take up 60%. For the rural to small communities, they take up 21%, and for the medium size, they take up 19% for our study. And moving on to the environmental sustainability and stewardship, we ask if they have government's policy that address sustainability and or environmental stewardship. 65% saying yes, 16% saying no, 1% prefer not to say, and 18% I don't know. We highlight the I don't know answer in blue since the survey was mostly completed by participants in leadership role. So this response really highlighted the area that could be improved in terms of awareness. Also, it could be related to the lack of time, resources, or expertise on the site. We asked similar question with climate risk assessment complete, 51% saying yes, 24% saying no, 25% saying I don't know. In terms of Green Team and Sustainability Officer, we asked if they have them on site. Green Team, they're really the grassroots team that exists in a site to work on local issues that related to the climate change. 8% saying yes, 83% saying no, 3% prefer not to say, and 6% I don't know. In terms of sustainability officer or office, 13% saying yes, 67% saying no, 2% prefer not to say, and 18% I don't know. And usually the sustainability office or officer, they're the one really work around the climate risk assessment or the sustainability plan. So having the previous slides in the I don't know response, this could be a reason why. And in terms of the complete risk management initiative, 73% looking at the infrastructure, 54% looking at the climate adaptation planning and strategy development, 54% looking at the forming partnership with external organizations. And this is especially helpful for this affiliated contracted site, considering they might don't have the resources as a acute care hospital. Having that partnership really act as a safeguard in terms of emergency events. 50% looking at knowledge building or training activities, 30% looking at the sustainability procurement policy and practices, 27% looking at the climate resilient organizational policy development, and 26% looking at climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And we actually completed upgrade or retrofitting. 73% looking at HVAC, 56% looking at the electrical upgrades, 55% looking at the kitchen and laundry equipment upgrades, 27% looking at generator, 27% looking at the water, 19% looking at the window replacement or retrofitting, 19% looking at the installation, 19% looking at the elevator, especially for like residents who have mobility issues or impaired mobility ability to rely on elevator to get up and down or outside. 5% looking at the road access to from the site. In terms of the barrier to sustainability project, majority 63% looking at lack of government funding, 30% looking at the other priorities, 16% look at the lack of awareness or an expertise. Thinking about between long-term care home and hospital, what resources were put into place and what supports they have compared with like acute care in hospital and long-term care. 8% looking at lack of funding from fundraising, 8% looking at lack of interest from those working at the site, 5% saying lack of support from parent organization, 4% is lack of interest from those living at the site. In terms of specific sustainability program services or practices, 85% really look at recycling, which is great. 56% look at reducing single-use plastic. 40% looking at gardening program that can produce food to use on site. 39% looking at using biodegradable or non-toxic cleaning supplies. 37 looking at composting, 19 looking at sourcing local produce, and 7% looking at the other really excellent sustainable practice that has been used. So to end our presentation with implication of survey results, with all the excellent initiative on each site, how can we scale up to make even bigger impact for the sustainability practice across organization and system? And how do we measure the impact of if there even make a differences? And of course, what funding, resources, and supports are needed for this work? What do we need and how do we get there? And that is the end of our presentation. I'll hand it over to Dr. Brombush.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of slides about our next steps, and then see if we have time for a couple of questions. So just in terms of what's next for each of these studies, for the extreme heat study, we are looking at combining the Vancouver and Montreal data for analysis. We'll also be doing some policy analysis work. For the photo voice study, as Lena mentioned, the last piece of this participatory action research study is to do a workshop. And the real point of that workshop is for people who participate in this study to get to talk directly to people who are making decisions about how policy and programming for that address the mental health impacts of climate change on older adults happen, and our participants are really looking forward to that. Along with the workshop, we'll be launching a virtual gallery, and that will be coming soon. It's a lot of work, as you can imagine, to design that type of website, so it's almost there. And then we just got funding from CIHR to do a traveling photo exhibition, so we'll actually be visiting some galleries. We'll see how this goes. And we're going to start in Vancouver and potentially move across the country so that it can reach our partners who are in Ontario. And then for the long-term care sustainability and emergency management study, we just were able to post a recording of our full webinar on the results of that survey, and that's now available on our study website. And that includes the information about emergency management. And we are launching a new study where we'll be working with a subset of care homes to develop their own climate readiness plans. So if anyone knows a long-term care home in BC that would like to participate in that study, please do reach out to me. And that's going to be a pretty exciting kind of community of practice kind of thing that we're going to be co-creating, so I can't really say much more about it because that will be something you work with the sector to develop. If you'd like any more information about any of the studies, you can visit our website. We try and keep it up to date. Or you can always email me, jero@nursing.ubc.ca. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide resources about any of the research we're doing or any of the studies that we've mentioned today. So with that, I will wrap it up. And thank you all for being here. And I think we may have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your research. My question is what is your definition of immigrant? Because we use the word immigrant, is it lifelong being an immigrant? And my second question is when we talk about people dying of heat wave, what does it say in the death certificate as a cause of death?
So for the first question, in our study, we included people who moved from different countries to Canada. So those are immigrants. And for the second question, I'm sorry if you can repeat the second question. I didn't.
Cause of death.
The cause of death on their death certificate, if they died during the heat wave, what did it say? He's asking. I don't know if you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Publications by Sarah Henderson at the BC Centre for Disease Control that detail a lot about the deaths of people during the heat dome. There's also a coroner's report that's publicly available. So what I know from reading just sort of like the general study is that people died and they met the definition for dying from heat exposure. But beyond that, I don't know any more details about what would have been on those certificates. But that information should be more detailed in the coroner's report and Sarah Henderson's studies.
Is it Julia Henderson?
Sorry?
Is it Julia? Henderson?
Sarah Henderson. It's not Julia Henderson. It's Sarah Henderson. And again, I'm anybody, I'm happy to email the papers. And most of them are available open access if you go on Google Scholar. But Sarah is the scientific director of the BC Centre for Disease Control, and her team continues to publish excellent, excellent papers about the heat dome, and her specialty is around wildfires and air quality. And they're really excellent papers to read, and most people should be able to access them pretty easily.
I'm curious to know whether there was any indication that as people worked with these photo journaling, whether that had an impact on their own perception of injury by that experience. Do you get the
I'm
question?
smiling, but I'll let Lena answer the question. But go ahead, Lena.
And you can add anything.
I will add, yeah.
I don't know if this is on. Shall I try this? We're definitely still in process, but I would say, if anything, my perception is so far is that people's engagement in the process actually often deepened their sense of companionship and some level of hope for connecting both with the interviewer who they met with over time and also with the focus groups, and also for the future possibilities in the project that they know about, of the workshop and other things. So that's what I've witnessed most actively, and we'll be delving further to look at all the interviews and the data around that.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So I got to sit in on the focus groups that Lena conducted, and the person who experienced the wildfire, it was so powerful to hear her talk. And she said she felt like we were the first people to ask her about the mental health impacts of losing her home. And that she realizes now, after reflection, that she probably has PTSD from that experience. What was most interesting for me in the focus group, because I've done a lot of focus groups over the past 30 years, is how the other people in the focus group wrapped around her. And Lena and I really stepped back, and we didn't need to talk. And it was the other older people who said, I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but I just feel so much empathy for you. And it was just a really amazing interaction. And I think that's why it's such an important conversation, because I think that their thoughts do evolve. And then we had people who participated and said, I don't know why I'm here. It hasn't affected my mental health. But then over the course of conversation, they're like, oh yeah, I guess maybe it has. So I do think there's great sort of potential for climate cafes and other opportunities for people to come together and just talk with each other. And that also, like Lena said, is also helping with growing the activism, growing the hope, feeling less isolated. Because I think from the heat study, from the photo voice study, social isolation is a big thing during extreme weather events. And so feeling that you are part of a community is so valuable to people.
Thank you.
Okay, on that note, let's thank Jennifer Baumbusch and her team for that excellent presentation.